Thank you.
Wonderful. Nice to have such a great group. I'll pass over to Linda and Aydin. Maybe you can introduce yourself as part of your presentation. I'll need to make you hosts in order for you to share the slides.
Thank you, Ante. Linda, would you like to start the introduction?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Linda Orie. I'm a graduate student in the doctoral program at UW-Madison in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction. So very pleased to be part of the Indigenous Learning Lab project for the last 4 years under Dr. Aydin.
Thank you, Linda. My name is Aydin. I'm a professor of education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm also the faculty director of Global Engagement Office currently. And Linda and I are a part of the larger collaborative coalition or commune, however you want to call it, commune of scholars in the project called Learning Lab. And our work is to design the future of the schools with local stakeholders. So this design, we are studying how to facilitate inclusive, transformative, and effective decision-making and future-making processes. Today, we are going to present you one of our projects called Indigenous Learning Lab. We have learning labs in different countries, in different settings for different purposes. In short, we have been conducting learning labs since 2012. So this is our 11th year. And we have learning labs in Florida, New Hampshire, Kansas. And we are going to open new learning labs in Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia. And we have a learning lab in Brazil and Malawi. And hopefully we are going to have another one in Turkey. In the Indigenous Learning Lab, in each learning lab, depending on the context, we are adding new epistemologies, new theoretical approaches to the issue, but often the issue is racial disparities or racialization of behavioral problems, psychological problems in school settings. In this project, that was our starting point. And in this project, we work with the community as a part of the Anishinaabe Nation in the northern Wisconsin. So this is an international project from our perspective because we honor and acknowledge the sovereignty of the tribal nation, Anishinaabe Nation. And school was outside of the reservation, Anishinaabe Nation tribal land, but 25% of the students were attending the school. And the school has had major disparities in terms of outcomes for the American Indian students in terms of disciplinary actions, suspension, expulsion, dropout rates, and their academic achievements. And we have been working with this community. We started work with the community before the project. So this is our moving into the 4th year, but we started this project 6 years ago. I want to mention that my co-PI, Aaron Bear, who couldn't be over here today, but he's the former tribal relationship director at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So Aaron and I traveled different reservations, different tribes, different communities to find the right place for the right context for this project. And we found a school where the school leaders try to rebuild the relationship between the tribe and tribal government to address racial disparities or those disparities that American Indian students are facing. And the community was welcoming that effort, but they didn't have any mechanisms to systematize this relationship and turn this relationship into a systemic transformation. So we implemented Indigenous Learning Lab right before the COVID. And during the COVID, we work on the design phase as well. Then we work with the community, stayed with the community, and work on the implementation. So this is our 3rd year, ending 3rd year, and the community, I can say that the school community has taken ownership and leadership in this project. And now we are working on the new phases of understanding the cycle of implementation and sustainability. So those are our, hopefully, contribution to the field. I'm just going to turn to Linda to give you more specific information about the project, then collectively we can have a dialogue.
Thank you, Professor. I will share my slides with you. Okay. Sorry for the delay. Oops. Okay. For some reason I can't make it. Sorry for the delay, everyone.
Linda, are you trying to just present it?
Yeah, for some reason I can't find
The slideshow button is off to your right on the top.
Oh, here we
next to
go.
the share. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, so you see on the screen, I had to cover up some identifiers, obviously for the names of the tribe and the school. So apologize for those blocks on there. We have, this is a partnership project. This took a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of, relationship building to even get the project off the ground. So thank goodness for Dr. Ball and the CRPBIS team here at UW-Madison. And then we had a wonderful funding through the Grand Challenges Project, which is from the School of Education. And then the other partners, the tribe, Dr. Ball mentioned traveling around to look for a possible site for this research. And this particular Anishinaabe Nation in the Northwoods of Wisconsin had this readiness. They had already done a lot of work, despite the negative relationships and clashes between the tribe and the school over the past several generations, probably since the school was begun. So this is it was just the right place. And incidentally, my nephew was a student at the school at the time, at the beginning of the project. So we had a lot of kind of informal, but really important feedback about the general functioning of daily life in the eyes of a Native student. All right. So Dr. Ball mentioned 4 years of Indigenous Learning Lab. Definitely our work was disrupted by COVID. The first year, the design phase, that was really instrumental, obviously, in laying the groundwork for these partnerships and also for the interactions between the diverse team. So probably the most important thing about the team is its diversity, right? Different stakeholders, parents, students, community members, administrators, and of course, teachers. In our first year, we wanted to not just have teachers at the school site at the high school, but also the K-8 school that is one of the feeder schools for this high school. So Dr. Ball mentioned also, so this nation is about 20 minutes or so away from the high school, which is not on the reservation, but it's the only choice. It's the only place that the tribal students can go for high school, and it is mandatory, so it's if they don't attend, it's breaking the law. There's truancy court, etc. So it's a forced education that they're attending at the high school. The school that they're coming from is a K-8 public on the reservation, and that's kind of interesting situation because you would think there would be a lot more tribal teachers and people from the area, but actually they're pretty much all 100% white teaching staff and administrators, and there are some culture and language teachers, and that's something that we'll talk more about in a little while. So over the 4 years, we had the design phase where we came together, community members, and the school looking at the data, this community members asking to disaggregate the data by race to really show the differences in the overall school functioning versus how the Native students are experiencing. And so that was really telling. We had a lot of hard conversations about the past and a lot of the clash between the tribal community and the school, a lot of accusations of racism on both sides. And a lot of this stemming from the Walleye War of the 80s and 90s, early 90s, when tribal members were exercising their treaty rights and spearing walleye off and other fish off reservation. But the white community, was in uproar. This was one of the centers of the anti-Native movement. So a lot of protesting at boat landings, throwing rocks, cans, et cetera, even at at kids and families that were just exercising their treaty rights. And so one of our leaders on our team has been, he had the experience as a student, and then now he was a Native American mentor at the school. His father was actually one of the chairmen of this tribe, and he lived through that terrible, Walleye War era where he had to face his teachers that had just thrown bottles and rocks at him, on the weekend when his family was fishing, and then there's his teacher on Monday morning. So, we had a lot of really hard things to hear and to go through. And then also to see how those kind of bad feelings and some of this from the past is still with us today and still causing a lot of, broken relationships between teachers and students, especially when it's cultural spearing time, sometimes when they have, the season, of course, they're always getting flack still, or they were getting a lot of flack. We'll talk more about this later, for exercising their treaty rights, for not being there during the spring season sometimes. Year 3 implementation. So of course, COVID impacted us. We had, instead of, full implementation year 2, it was partial just because the kids weren't there. The school had a lot of huge barriers, even just they didn't have the bandwidth necessarily for the Wi-Fi to work or for the internet to be accessible by all the tribal students. So a lot of kids, and then of course a lot of kids, were babysitting, helping out around the house, some had to work, etc. So there was just a huge problem, right? Not just the original problems, but this huge COVID disruption. And so year 3 implementation, of course, continually evaluating the new things that the school had started, the new innovations that they had begun. And then in our final year, we're looking at sustainability, right? Is this institutionalized? Is this system somewhere? Is it living somewhere where it doesn't depend on just 1 or 2 leaders to carry it through, but it's kind of naturally evolved as a general functioning of the building. And of course, with that is scale up and buy-in from teachers, moving from our small group of 14 to the entire school. So in our design process, we had 14 original members, and this again took a while just because there's always someone missing, right? We had a limited amount of capacity and the functioning size of the task force to really get a lot of work done. So we had to focus on diversity, gender diversity, age diversity, of course, different stakeholder roles of, parent, student, etc. So we had a really good team. And we had some really outspoken community members that really drove, the tribal viewpoint home as far as being extremely serious about, finally dealing with all of these broken relationships and all these problems that were impeding the Native students' learning and being accepted in the building even. So if you see on the right there, the cycle of change this is the cycle that we follow for the other learning labs in the past. And of course, this always depends on the exact context, right? And then this did get impacted by COVID. We went from in-person meetings, which are hugely important, especially being able to meet on the reservation, where tribal members felt a lot more comfortable, right? Because the school site had been a place of trauma for so many of them. So, and then Dr. Bell mentioned we're working on what the cycle looks like for implementation. And of course, it was impacted by COVID, so it would look, different from a model that other schools might experience. But, and then also, what does sustainability look like going forward? So that's kind of a little bit of a graphic to guide us. If you see on the left there, the picture, this is one of the administrators. And one of the first things we did was look at the existing behavior system. What does the existing behavior system look like? And basically it was 1 page, you see these rectangles, organized by it's all about the behavior itself. Was it a minor offense? Was it a major offense? And then, various categories of these offenses, and then what happens to the student when they've committed them. And it would seem, pretty cut and dry. The school, thought it was, colorblind, and that they treat all students equally, that, it's pretty much just a matter of what the actual offense is rather than, relationships and historical context and cultural context. And then you see on the right there, one of the Native mentor I mentioned that's been a tremendous leader, one of our liaisons with the school. And one thing that he brought that was so important and really set the stage so well all the time was bringing his, some cultural ways into our meetings. So for example, we smudged, using sage. He brought some of his items, even pipe ceremony sometimes, just to help, build that sense of trust and dispel negativity. Because again, we're talking about some really difficult, conversations and a lot of, traumatic memories, especially for students that are still in the building, telling stories, of negative interactions with teachers, getting in trouble, getting suspended, et cetera, and then some of the perceptions that are extremely well known throughout in the circles of students, but obviously not as well known amongst the teachers and the administrators. So after that first year, the design team, we just came up with a ton of possibilities, like a ton of, imagining, what would the ideal school system look like, or the ideal behavior system. And even without having to put it in the words of, calling it something else, just the natural way that everyone kind of developed these new ideal solutions. They basically clustered around 3 large themes. Building relationships, just that is fundamental, that's key. not just individually, but among, the tribe, the parents, and the school, and the larger community. Communication is the vehicle to do all of this, right? And not just, written notes home or emails or something like that, but in person, real, communication, and not often just about positive topics, right? There's a lot of, trauma and things that need to be discussed among all stakeholders and all the students and staff. And then everything, moving the whole behavior control or behavior, system into prevention, education, prevention, making sure that, students are aware of expectations, that these are common, and the expectations aren't just for the students, but also for staff, so that the staff can, show respect to the students first without demanding, respect is something that's a different way of being, from a tribal person, at least in this area, to the school. So those conversations shifted the entire way that the stakeholders wanted to design the system. So instead of a punitive, it's preventative. Instead of, consequences that are punishing and pushing the kids out, like suspending and segregating them in ISS rooms, more about education. And so we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So looking at the big picture, how is our project a utopian project? How do we work towards this, given the dystopian life that a lot of the students still live, after 400 plus years of colonization? And so if you look at the left, just some aspects of the settler colonial school system that are now basically operating in all the public schools in the US, to varying degrees, we're bent on destroying tribal nationhood, right? Boarding schools, taking students away from their families, even taking them without permission oftentimes. And there was a boarding school in the area on the reservation. Now it's a historical center owned by the tribe. And so this community did experience boarding schools. And then with those schools, and then of course in the public school, epistemic erasure, exclusion of the indigenous ways of knowing, ways of being, culture, language, etc. Strictly, only English classes, of course, literature classes, all based in, mainstream, usually white authors, etc. And then, of course, the whole, capitalistic culture of individualism, right? This rugged individualism where if there are differences and students are suffering because of those differences, the attitude is often, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and, you can, we're all equal here. Our school is this great equalizer. And we know often that that's not usually the case. And I already mentioned about the reactive discipline. And then one thing, too, that I haven't mentioned yet is this tremendous, sense of blame and shame, this inadequacy felt by a lot of students, not fitting in, not being welcomed at the school. One of our members, our actually implementation team students, who's a student at the school, mentioned that her teacher doesn't even say her name, never says hi, So things like this are just extremely eye-opening, and so grateful for the students for being honest and having the courage to bring these up. And then if you look at the right box, systemic change via the utopian method, where we try to, given all this dystopian, given all this strife and trauma and, bad memories, how can we build something new? And so part of this comes with sovereignty, building the tribal sovereignty and, affirming that power that resides in Native communities and has resided there, since time immemorial. And that's why, we're still here. And then, of course, integrating local tribal culture, language, ways of being and knowing. And with Act 31, it's all the public schools are supposed to be integrating some type of, local tribal history and culture into their curricula, but it's not enforced. There are no teeth, as Aaron Birdweir would say, in the act. There's no repercussion if a school doesn't do it. So, but fortunately, this location did decide to go with, in years past, Ojibwe language class, Ojibwe culture class, but those classes aren't necessarily taught by a Native person. And that's something one of our students pointed out last year. So, so even though, they're not necessarily, they don't manifest in the ways that the tribal people necessarily would prefer. And then this relates to promoting collectives, of course, so not just the tribe, but of course the students, the power of all the indigenous students being able to, be together in the site, of suffering that's primarily white space. and then preventing negative interactions by building positive relationships. There are a lot of like PD series. There's a PD series that they had hired a Native person to do basically every, I think it's twice or 3 times a year. So it's pretty often. So it's not just a one and done event, but it's something that's more intentional about integrating tribal culture and language and ways of being into the curriculum, and also for building those relationships between the teachers and the students. And then the last piece, when we talk about the blame and shame on the left, and how do we change that? Because this is such a ingrained thing in not just all the public schools, but especially in areas where there's such a stark difference in socioeconomic class, where the Native students are always on the bottom. If you're looking at the school reports, the lower achievement, lower graduation rates, et cetera, substance abuse problems, referrals, et cetera. And so through our process, through our change process, all the white stakeholders are basically forced to see how all this is ingrained in communities. This is not just a one student's bad decision to do something one day. There's tremendous suffering, there's tremendous strife, there's tremendous AODA issues, not just in the area, not just in that nation, but all over Native America, all over, white stream America, and especially during COVID, there are a lot of, negative patterns that developed, nationwide. So we're trying to focus again on prevention and then also on using tribal resources too. Something had happened on a bus, where there's AODA issue, and in the past, the school used to follow the behavior chart and dole out suspensions, et cetera, using individual level discipline. And in this case, they actually called the nation, they called the tribe, the AODA resources there, and dealt with the situation as a tribal resource matter, and not just an individual thing. And that was great. That was great for the tribe. The tribe actually commended the school on that, because it had never been done before. And then there was a slight backlash from I think 1 or 2 white parents had called or emailed and complained, but the school took it. The administrator said it was no big deal, they just moved on. And then the bus incidents lessened after that. So, that's just kind of one concrete example of, dealing with the nation rather than the individual, and what happens when you affirm tribal sovereignty. Okay. So some of this is really exciting. So this is just a sample. These are big categories of innovations that the school, through the design team process and through the implementation, the school has changed in the systemic functioning. For example, the code in the attendance system is huge. So in the past, I mentioned the walleye war. The kids didn't want to admit when they were absent because they were out spearing, because there was this terrible backlash from the white community. And these traditions haven't gone away, right? They've been practiced for thousands of years. The kids still go out spearing, and now all they have to do is write a note, to explain that, give it to the office. And now they're not marked unexcused anymore. So they've developed a whole code just for that, like a cultural participation code. The Voyager program, it reaches the youth that don't have enough credits to graduate. So it's a direct program to not just help the kids, shore up the academic skills to get ready to graduate, but to just be in the building, to be there, to have education, and that's actually in the form of outdoor ed a lot. Doing a lot of cultural practices. There's a picture there. They're gathering, they're making wreaths for the community service event that they were hosting. And so looking at treaty rights, looking at, hunting and fishing, quotas and rights, and how to go about, even marketing, coming up with a business plan to market the items that they're creating. So it's really heavily based in Ojibwe language and culture. They hired 2 new Indian Ed mentors. Fred got promoted into have his own UCM there to promoted, so that they realized they still needed the mentors. So they have 2 now instead of 1, really shoring up the 8th grade transition, because that was a huge point of weakness that the school had seen, that it took them like 2 years to even just get acclimated to the building, to know the rules, et cetera. So to really, start the transition sooner. They developed something called Thunderbird 20, which is the school mascot, and is an extremely powerful symbol of Ojibwe culture. And this Thunderbird 20 is just about forming relationships between a small group of students and teachers. And it's, very flexible. They use it to play games and to do different things and check-ins, and just to strategically allow 20 minutes every single day just for that relationship building. They started a new leadership team and structure to better assist all of the different components of not just the system but the overall building functioning. They started tutoring at the Tribal Youth Center, so not just tutoring hours at the school, but on the reservation at the youth center, several days a week, sending lots of teachers, different teachers, to support the high school students there. They developed a universal framework, the acronym We Care. So again, this isn't just for the students, but also staff expectations, so that we're all in this together. I already mentioned Indigenous Centered PD, and then the Headwaters program is a program that instead of just ISS, where it's a punishment for behavioral infractions, one of our teachers, who's also the social worker, who's been there for a very long time, has a lot of good relationships. He's non-native, but he's very invested in the Native community, and they have education-centered programming in that space called Headwaters. So these are a lot of the innovations. Sorry if I've taken too long. Finally, overall, our process of making Utopia via dystopia, right? And it's growing from this conflict. It's growing from the anger. It's growing from the broken relationships. And we're, coming together to see what we can make positive about all of that and how we can change. And then all of our work has been grounded in the 7 grandfather teachings. That's very important for Ojibwe culture. And thanks to one of our leaders for bringing those to us. And I think that's all I have for you. Oh, sorry, one more thing. So this is all dependent on context, of course, time, place, people. And then, of course, there's always someone missing. We're always constrained in these ways. So it's important to keep the door open and to find, let the community members find, identify who's missing. And then, of course, I talked a lot about sovereignty, growing collective power, and then making the success real, making the academic and social success real for Native students, because it hasn't been real, right? It's been the opposite for so long. And then all of this comes along with empowering Indigenous leaders, students, community members, parents, not just to share their experiences, but to lead with their ideas has been instrumental. So sorry about that. I might have taken too long, but any questions?
Great. Please feel free, everyone, to comment or raise questions. We usually have had a kind of very informal discussion around these presentations. And thank you, Linda and Aydin, for the excellent presentation.
Well, perhaps I could start.
Please do.
Yes, also because I have to leave in about 20 minutes. There is in Italy the month's mass for my dad, and I will actually attend online because I cannot be in Italy at the moment. But yes, this is really awesome work. It gives me a lot of energy to think what you're doing, and also a lot of inspiration for the type of research I conduct together with my students and colleagues. I would like to ask for a clarification in your context, and also for advice. What do you mean by systemic change in your context? One, and then the second thing, the advice. One obstacle I am meeting in my own current work, trying to foster a meeting between cultural historical activity theory and indigenous way of knowing, is to try not to bring in this big load of concepts and understanding that is typical to cultural historical activity theory in the discussions with those who represent the indigenous way of knowing. And still, how is it possible to foster this type of dialogue? the assumption being in our case that there is quite a lot of similarity in ways of thinking in terms of complexity, in terms of systems, in terms of dialectical dynamics of nature and culture. But how can this happen? So I would like to hear from your experience of how these meetings take place, and what would be your advice from your experience to us when we are trying to do this type of meeting between scholars and those who are knowledgeable about the indigenous way of knowing, like the seniors, for instance. So these are my 2 cents contribution for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ball, did you want to address that?
No, I'll let you start, and I have some ideas, but please go ahead, Linda, if you have any.
Sure.
Insights.
Dr. Sanino, you mentioned, you asked about what is systemic change? And I think that's something that only the people in the place in that exact context can envision and enact. For me, it's, the relations between the parts of the system, the various components, and where these things come together, and then the change is evidence in something new, like yielding something completely new, versus patterns of, things that they had want to change. The easiest example I can think of is that code in the system that they created in Infinite Campus, which is something that is pretty cut and dry. It's used in probably most of Wisconsin's public schools. And I didn't even know that there was a possibility to create a new code, to how to handle a cultural absence from school. And so the school took it upon themselves. That didn't come out, that wasn't mentioned by a researcher, or, it wasn't anything from the top down. It was something that the stakeholders in the place, the administrators, designed and changed the way that they handle these absences. And then we're hearing reports of a lot more parent notes, which is basically communications from home. Now that now that their sovereignties and their treaty rights are affirmed, with the spearing, oh, okay, all you have to do is send in a note. This is why so-and-so is absent today. So that's been a really concrete example of the way it's played out for systemic change for us. But they're all over the place, and they're still evolving. So that's what's really exciting. As far as your question about is the work possible with Native stakeholders and actually using our learning lab process was extremely amenable for that, because Indigenous nations often think a lot more holistically, right? And the importance of being in person, being embodied, action, and having this dialogue, being open to it is essential. We were really fortunate because our stakeholders were very open to it. There had been an Eagle staff delivered by the tribe to the school, which was a sign of goodwill and trust, and that had a prominent place in the office, where everyone could see it. The school had hosted powwows, and various cultural events at times, just to show, support and give space for the tribal members to attend. So that readiness to me is key, but a lot of it has to do just with affirming tribal ways of being. For example, our Indian Ed mentor led every meeting with a smudging ceremony. And all this, everyone took part, all the white, stakeholders took part, and it didn't question it, didn't shame or deny it. They were very willing to be at these meetings every month. And then, of course, using some of the Ojibwe language, as an opening was hugely important. Some of our white teachers that had been in the building long enough, they had picked up some of the words and phrases, so they would even interject, Ojibwe language. And our students to hear that, our parents, our community members to hear that and to see that has been really transformative. So a lot of it, from my perspective anyway, has to do with letting the Indigenous ways of being and culture and language, let those concepts and those actions lead the way. And then to let go, right? It's really hard as researchers to let go of some of the control and some of the power and some of the direction that you want to take, you want the work to take. But this is all about power sharing, right? And being open to things that you may not ever have imagined in the first place, right? But that can only come from the context and the tribal nation at the table.
Thank you, Linda. I can see that there are in the chat, many people have raised interesting questions and thoughts. I'd like to maybe ask Felipe, maybe you can raise your question in person.
All right, it's more no more about the day-by-day of your work, Linda, with the communities, the frustrations, the difficulties in try to change some aspect of the community of the school. How do you manage these things in these situations? Right? Thank you.
Sure. A lot of times there was some silence. There was some uncomfortable silence, when students were testifying their experiences, being followed into the bathroom by a male, security guard, having students testify about, what they hear at home, about the school, our own members' painful experiences. Like I mentioned, our Indian Ed mentors' experience as a student in the building. So it was tough, and I really commend our white stakeholders and our administrators for being there and being present and allowing the space to just sit there and sometimes be speechless, sometimes to turn red and to feel embarrassed and, oh, I didn't realize we didn't have a female hall monitor, things that it shows a lot of systemic dysfunction and breakdown, and often in our bureaucratic systems the administrators are ultimately responsible. So the people at the table really have to have that courage and be open, and then of course everyone else to be able to offer different ideas, suggestions, etc., for alternate decisions. But yeah, it's all about too the positivity that comes with making something new, the healing that comes with being able to have a space to create those actions, to create those relationships, to testify to negative experiences, yet do something about it, right? And then build relationships together through what we envision together for our children. So I guess it depends on the context, the time, and the place, but a lot of it just has to do with the readiness, and then the power sharing, and then of course the willingness to try something new, and to even, first of all, believe it's possible. But of course people won't be there if they wouldn't think it was possible, and then scaling up is another matter, right? And so we have to gradually let go and to let the administrators lead once we leave.
Great, thanks. Also, Julian had some reflections. Would you like to share it with all of us, Julian?
It was just a question, Auntie, because the presentation made me think about the research with Safina and so on and others, that we began the research with an understanding of how the ethnic minority community, oppressed communities, felt alienated from school in various ways. But one of the things that happened was during the research was we started to conceptualize not just the community, but communities plural. And this was because I think of class, gender, generation, and other things. So it would be very easy in the research data that we had to be, to pretend that there was a unified block here in the community, the ethnic minority oppressed community. Certainly I recognize some parallels with what was presented, but I just wondered whether there was any signs of that kind of issue within the I'm not sure if this is the right description, but I think the term tribal community was used, something like that. I just wondered whether that was an issue between the young people and the older people, etc., etc.
Julian, wonderful question. That was our starting assumption, because we didn't think that any community as like monolithic, frozen in time. This is a very common problem in terms of working with or conceptualization of the Native American communities in the United States. Either one approach is exotize, other approach is like seeing like a frozen in time and just one unique monolithic entity. But every time we work with any communities, we acknowledge and actually foster this in-group diversity, within group diversity. And that was the case, for example, for us, definitely. Linda may remember this one. We drive 3-4 hours to this community, which is northern Wisconsin. We are in the south end. And coming back, always we have like a 2-3 hour reflection meeting, and we video record that. Record those sessions, and Linda may remember that we are always amazed and try to make meaning of those kind of conceptualization. For example, location of the problem. Some community members may say, look, this is us, this is our problem, we need to take care of ourselves. Other community members may have different interpretations, and in between, and there are political positions, power relationships within the tribe, just like within the school. So these are diverse places, and in our work, that's why representation is important. And in our conversations, for example, even within the students, like in the design phase, one student was saying, look, I'm happy with the school, I'm doing well. I know some of my friends may think I'm an apple, which means red outside, white inside. They may see me that way, and the other students were just saying they had more problems with the school system. So there's that kind of diversity. But again, as Linda mentioned, that in academia we can unpack those things, engage in these discourses, but at the same time, our aim is to move from problem identification to problem solving. This is a very interesting process. So we have this diversity, multi-voicedness, and that's a part of our chat tradition, right? And Orie and and others have cited like the Bakhtin and others to acknowledge that. So that's our starting point as well. But over here, we were reaffirmed that. And that was our approach. So since the beginning, we always acknowledge and honor and nurture that diversity, but turn that energy into systemic transformation. Yeah.
Well, I think that's very positive, and I think that it's not just acknowledging diversity, but it's acknowledging the positive strengths of diversity within the block, the community or communities, I think, which is really positive. And I think it's one of the things we're working on at the moment is how to bring together in solidarity very different, really different communities, oppressed communities. We have a community that is often labeled white working class, and they appear to say many of the same things about the teachers in school that the ethnic minority teachers are worried about, but they express it in different language, and the language is of course important, but it gives us a sort of hope that we can bring these communities together in solidarity. So the very people who might be kind of marshaled into, the kind of thing that we heard described about, hooligans, attacking ethnic minorities and so on, might be brought around to understand that they can challenge the same authoritarian systems. This is something that we're talking about a lot now. I just throw that in, but it was great to hear about what you're doing.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Aydin. I see that Beth and Anna have said something in the chat, and maybe Beth, you could start. You were first.
Is it okay, Anna? I didn't know I was first. I'm just curious. I really, really enjoyed this presentation, and I found it really uplifting and helped me to think about Utopia in a new way. So I'm very grateful. I have one question, which is for my doctoral students. I think they would very much like to hear this talk, and I hadn't invited them because it's not an open group like some of our coffee hour or things like that. So I wonder, Auntie, maybe we can think about a process for sharing some of the videos with students if that's comfortable for the whole group. And then my main question is that in our Playworld group that studies play, working with teachers and children and imaginary characters very closely, we've started to question whether it's useful to have university-based researchers at all when it gets to the problem solving, that if it's actually more efficient at a certain point. It was nice of me to introduce this Playworlds model to the schools, but the question of whether I need to be there now. I mean, I've worked with these teachers for 10 years and they happen to like me. So they're like, can you keep coming? But this question of how we're getting funding and using funding is what we're thinking about. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Linda, what do you think? This is our current conversation, Pat. Thanks so much for this question. Because again, we are ending our relationship with the school in this project base. We are going to continue our partnership. They are coming and presenting this work, actually. We present with them. We are going to write with them. We have been writing with them. So, but Linda, you were a teacher before, and your expertise in this science curriculum development, curriculum instruction. So what do you think about Pat's question and our current struggle in terms of like how to end and transition into the post-intervention process?
Right. It's always hard to let go. You know, for me, this is my third education project as a grad student, and it's by far been the most transformative and powerful. And so it's hard to let go, right, of your baby. But of course, you know, we're you know, physically, right, we're you know, 4 hours away even. And so it's been difficult. But also I think it's a lot about the school, right? It's about ultimately it's all about the kids, it's all about the school, it's all about, you know, what's feasible, you know, in their lived experience. So they ultimately have to make that decision. And actually for the past maybe year or so, we've kind of been, you know, trying to feel it out as far as, you know, the relationship, you know, is this time to let go? You know, we actually extended by 1 year. We originally had 3 years planned, and now we had, you know, the 4th year. A lot of that could be due to COVID, but yeah, they're basically telling us now to you know, that they have their own work to do. They have all the projects are started, they're all underway, they have refining to do. So it's kind of like, no, we don't really need to meet again, you know, or maybe not, you know, we can meet for a social event, right, or something a little more ceremonial as a celebration to mark our time together, but not so much the work meetings anymore, which is actually, it feels good, but it's also, yeah, it's a little scary, but it's here. And I think that's where sustainability shows its evidence, right? Where it's in the hands, in the place, and they're growing it organically.
Yeah, but that's a very interesting feeling. And we are very happy and proud because we have been always advocating for this project. Is a formative intervention that should be led and owned by the community. And the community is doing that right now. They are just saying, look, we have our work to do. And then they are moving ahead. And with the plan they developed, in sometimes different directions with the additions. And this is a wonderful thing to see, this kind of like transformative agency. And please remember, this is our 3rd principle. So each year we have the new principle. And each principle owns this work more than the prior one. And each principle is coming from the same community, the white settler community. And if you look at them, they don't look like, they don't talk like, they don't use the terminology like the social justice warriors in the sense that we are hoping that, but what they do actually is amazing transformative work. As Linda mentioned, that they open up the decision-making process. Now the one principal is not making decision. They have a committee. They are making collective decisions, including teachers, American Indian mentors, vice principals, so distributed leadership. So there's this kind of culture shift, and our role right now is to capture those elements without just, we don't own that project anymore. We don't own that product anymore. So it's in their hands, and it's beautiful things to see, actually. Very joyful. Yeah.
Thank you for that answer. That really helps me to think. Yeah, Anna, you have time.
Yeah, I'll be very brief, and I wonder if maybe Eduardo will join just with my comment. But I didn't see, Eduardo, you raising a hand, so I'll speak a little bit maybe on behalf of myself, but also relating to your work, of course, and our joint work. But anyway, this is a delicate, wonderful work. Thank you so much, Aydin, Linda. Really, it's very impressive. Absolutely, it's clear where you're coming from. It's clear that this is working in amazing ways on so many levels. Fantastic. So really applause to you, absolutely. But of course, also thinking like, where can we push all of us together a little bit more, even for more radical, things, and especially thinking about the school by itself is the key instrument of oppression, just itself. And so you're entering the beast, like, what's the expression? Who knows? The heart of the beast. So say, Dada, please say.
The belly of the beast.
The belly,
belly
yes,
of
the
the
belly.
beast.
You
Yeah.
are in the belly. And so how difficult it is to work from the belly. Well, it is the belly of the beast. So I don't know any other instrument of colonization that is really more infused with violence. And so, yeah, the task force. I know you didn't invent the word. It's not you, of course. I'm talking about the school. I mean, I myself have been radicalizing gradually more and more, to the extent of saying now we need to stop teaching. We just need to stop teaching. I did a podcast exactly on this topic. So when Eduardo did his dissertation in the group home, Eduardo, sorry, I'll speak on your behalf very briefly and then you can take on. But just to say that we worked Eduardo worked in the group home with oppressed young boys from minorities, mostly Black boys, actually, really oppressed in the extreme. And I was the advisor and worked in a certain way together. But of course, Eduardo did really the work on the ground. And the position was to dismantle this institution, change it, as much as possible with the boys, by standing on the position of the boys, as you did too. I'm not saying you didn't, but in a very clearly making yourself vulnerable, going at the terrific vulnerability in terms of facing off the administration, fighting the administration. Eduardo will say more, okay? I'm just saying, and explicating it very clearly. To hell with this ideology of this particular school, of this institution, of this history of this institution, of the violence which is implied at every step of the way. And then Eduardo faced the resistance from everybody, really. And now it's time for you, Eduardo. Please speak. I just made this passionate intro to this. I'm just incensed by so many things. Not in your work. Your work is fantastic. You see, right? It's not about Linda and Aydin, your work.
No, just compliment briefly. Yeah, but I paid a price for antagonizing the the administration, and then I learned also to work with them. But just to comment on the vulnerability, but the fact that I by doing that I made myself so vulnerable, and that kind of like creating to use a Winnicott expression, like a holding environment for the boys, because they right, they could really see that I was on their side, in solidarity with them, and that created like a whole new basis for like a whole new context for the work to proceed.
Exactly, in an open conflict, confrontation, amazing vulnerability. And Eduardo described it in his works, okay? He described the vulnerability, the tension, the conflict, the pushback, the, what was it? Except for physical violence on Eduardo, everything else was there. Cursing, by the way, from both sides, from the boys as well. Cursing, blaming, Eduardo, again, I feel bad to say it for you, but I was there every step of the way. So, yeah.
And also resistance at the university too, for this kind of work.
Then additional layer that the university, the graduate center did not accept the work of Eduardo because it was too much on the ground, too conflictual, and there I had to fight the faculty at the graduate center who were openly saying, oh, that's not a mainstream positivist. Where did you test? You didn't do enough testing. Eduardo is a witness, right? And then there was another clash. It was clash after clash after clash. And yes, we didn't do maybe as much with but the institution was changed, by the way, at the end, the group home. because especially the counselors, Eduardo, right? The counselors who are black too, because who were against the boys and oppressing the boys, they changed, and then the institution changed, thanks to Eduardo. Okay, on small scale change, but just really stunning. But I guess I'm speaking for like the direct confrontation of us as researchers, I guess. But it's comes with price. I don't know. Aydin, what do you say? Linda, yes, I see Linda. You thank you for your note.
Would you like to respond? I didn't know.
Exactly. I would love to hear something.
I mean, we make these decisions. My perspective again, this is not about me, right?
Of course.
I may just, you know, we can fight or other things that's needed. But then I'm always thinking, when we leave, we can leave. Those students are going to attend those schools. There's no other school they can attend. And so it's always like a discussion dilemma. We discussed this one with Mike Cole too, where we are going to locate intervention, where we are putting our effort, right?
I see.
Within the system and change the system inside, or just dismantling or abolitioning the system outside. There's always different advantages, disadvantages, and different sides. Like as you mentioned, Eduardo's work, group home, sometimes you need to dismantle, you need to abolish those kind of places, you need to fight. And for our case, we choose a different direction, which is basically work with the school, work with the communities. And the tribal community was very welcoming. And during the COVID, all of the research projects stopped at UW-Madison. It was illegal for us to travel outside of the Madison, actually. But our project didn't stop. Community came, students, and the community came, we want to move forward, we want to continue. There is that kind of desire. So we are always thinking there's like how much pull and push we can do. Since the beginning, our aim was that this transformation effort is not going to depend on us. It's not about us. Our work is to just join and facilitate this transformation and put those right people in the right places. As Linda mentioned, that they changed attendance, they coordinated their school calendar with the tribal activities, but also the other cultural activities, like the settler students, white settler students were also hunting. There's a big hunting culture. They also incorporated that. So this transformation wasn't only for American Indian students, it was about this kind of exclusionary, disciplinary, punitive system, which was alienating and marginalizing all, most specifically American Indian students, but teachers were not happy, administrators were not happy. So there is this kind of dilemma, Anna, just, schooling is the main source of alienation. At the same time, where we put our effort, how we can be strategic about these things. So in each phase, we strategize differently. For example, in the school, we just say, look, there's this effort, willingness in the community to own and change the school. And the first time when we visited there, they were doing the saging ceremony. It was illegal to do the saging, the smoke, in the setting. Exactly. And the tribal mentor was going outside on the bus. This was the opening of the first day of the school. In the bus, like that was sidelined in some kind of, somewhere else. In the first months, our first meetings took place in the tribal center, community center on the reservation. That was several teachers' first time visiting that reservation. And then we move everything back to the school and along with the sage ceremony. And the tribal mentor, as Linda mentioned, that he said, this is the place. It was the former principal's office. This is the place where we were punished because we were speaking our language. We were just acknowledging our rights. Now we are doing our cultural practices over here, our ceremony over here. So those kind of reclaiming space, again, we cannot impose. As an outsider, I can say that dismantle everything, abolish everything. Acknowledgement is not enough. Just burn down the school. I can say that. But again, then I don't want to impose any kind of utopian goals to the people. And because as we mentioned that, as Julian mentioned, that there are diversity in the group, and some community members were thinking differently about systemic transformation. Our role was very interesting. Again, we don't want to impose anything or judge or police anyone over there. The whole idea was that they are going to make that decision. They are going to work through those kind of tension, contradictions within the group, between the communities. Our role was a little bit more build the structure, almost like a therapy session. My background is clinical psychology. So therapy session, you need to take over sometimes the power, create a platform, but you don't want to hold at the power because it's their work. So this is a very interesting place. But Anna, you're absolutely right. Eduardo, you're absolutely experienced. I think we need to think about the new way of research, new way of researcher identity through this kind of work. This work is making different challenges and possibilities, boundaries of this new work of researching. And again, that may change from one context to another context. One context may require fighting, abolishing the practices, like say we did in Wisconsin against the institutions for mental health institutions where the students with disabilities were placed. In 1970s, our institution fought to close those places. Sometimes you need to close, but other times you need to, in our choice, we let community to decide whatever they want to do. We don't want to impose any kind of ideals from outside.
Right. And of course, all I said was not meant as a critique of your work. It's just to say it again. It's just a need for the discussion that we do become political agents. When we come to do research, we are not neutral, even if we don't want to make decisions for them. But we cannot also be just tape recorders there or pretend that we are not intervening, because we are, and we bring in our agenda, our beliefs, and this needs to be explicit. I believe personally, I'm not saying I'm imposing it on you, but it just has, I think we need to move on away from like ideals of objectivity, like, oh, we will just be neutral. I'm not saying you do it. No, I'm just saying there needs to be a push more in psychology for an activist position to come through more clearly, of a political position, such as, especially for indigenous people, of course, again, education is exactly the belly of the beast. So I'm discussing something about colonialism in education in another context, so I'm bringing in a little bit of my frustration of the discussion here. That's not with you to do with you, but with how mainstream research is making us to being neutral, and how this never works and cannot work because we are not neutral. We are there making a lot of change, making contribution, and who we are and what we say and do, even without, of course, imposing on the community, of course, but nonetheless working together, because otherwise, who are we if we're not going to work together with community, not as imposing, not as white saviors, but yet with a sense of solidarity and things like that. But I didn't know you discussed it with Michael Cole, so what is my place to add to this? Of course. All right, I need to go anyway. Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you, Linda, Aydin.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you.
Greetings to all, Auntie, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Anna. Okay, Hendrik, you can have a go.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say thank you for this presentation and the work that you all have been doing. It's really, yeah, just really strong work. So I guess the idea of transformative agency has gotten brought up in here at least a couple of times, and I think in the chat as well. And it's been something that's on my mind based on some of the work that I'm involved in as well. And I'm just curious how you see, like when I read some of the published literature on transformative agency, there's a part of your work that seems like it's it may be not talked enough or just missing from the transformative agency work, which is like when you're talking about bringing in the 7 grandfather teachings. And then you have all these different dynamics that come at play, kind of these historical relationships between the tribe or the tribes and the school. You know, you got these power dimensions as well being involved. And so all this to say is, I feel like there's some matters of the heart that first need to align in order for these kinds of relationships to be sustained. And that's the kinds of things that I don't feel are talked about enough in the transformative agency literature. especially when we think about sustaining transformative agency over time. And so I just wonder, like, how did you all, what was that like? What were those kinds of, I know you said, we had to sit in discomfort sometimes, but even just thinking about kind of those matters of the heart. And when I say that, I guess I mean things like around, even just around developing trust, for example. So I guess my question is like, how did you all see that flourish or not flourish? Were there times when it was just kind of squashed? Yeah, I guess that's my question.
From my perspective, I feel like it had always been positive, even with the negative, just because everyone was sitting at the table, right, on an equal playing field and an equal, idea field, if you will. And we were constructive, right? Even the bad, altercations, even the bad stories, even all the trauma was used constructively, right? So the problem is identified, like Dr. Ball mentioned, it's problem identification to problem solving. So there's always, and sometimes we spend more time on certain stories than others, one of the ground rules of our group functioning was that if someone's telling a story, that it doesn't matter if it's time to go or the bell rings or whatever it is, that we sit there and we listen, because that's a tribal show of respect and especially to the story being told. So yeah, it's about letting them lead. It's about finding positives and being constructive. And then, a lot of times our white administrators were frustrated, oh, when can we start telling our own stories? When can we start telling the good stories? And, the community wanted to stay and pointing out the problems, so there's the tension, but we can make it, we can, let it yield new solutions and new relationships. And then one thing we didn't mention so much was the tremendous amount of laughter and joy and joking that we also shared during our meetings, being able to provide a nice catered meal, for everyone after, a long day at school, and being able to just informally hang out and, talk about the weather and various things happening. So yeah, it's balanced, but I think overall it's balanced in a very positive and very productive direction.
Thank you. I wonder if those who have not yet had a chance to ask a question or comment would like to. No pressure, absolutely. It's fine just to follow the question discussion.
I've been looking just because I wanted to hear just how other people would respond and the types of questions. This work is relatively new for me, and I think what I was maybe distracted by or trying to grapple with in my mind is how you can have and maybe there's an answer for this in the literature that I just haven't encountered, right? But like how you can have this diversity in opinions and ideas about, I guess, about what, because for me, what's implied, right, inherent in these conversations is like some imagination of what that better future is. But if everybody's coming at this from different experiences and with different wants and desires, how do we have a collective, how do we come to a collective or shared understanding or solidarity, collectivity? Like, how do you build something together if we're all seeing it from different approaches? And I don't know what, as you think about, maybe this is a question for as you think about a learning lab at a new school or in a new context, how do you kind of establish how the group will work past that? We have different ideas or different flavors of the future we want, but we can still do something collectively. That's kind of my question. It's not really a question. It's just something that I'm still trying to figure out. And I don't know if you can speak to it or not, but if you can, it's okay. This
is wonderful. I was just thinking about this one when I saw I know Linda has been spending time recently on this kind of idea, and Linda, you are doing the historical analysis of this kind of idea about this, because I love Linda's point about the utopia via dystopia. And I heard this one several times, and I read this one several times, specifically from the indigenous scholars in the United States, because they were always saying that if you want to see dystopia, what it means to be dystopia, every time we open our door and walk into the world, this is our dystopia. We live in our dystopia. And our TI, Aaron Bird Bear has been always mentioning that. Linda, Zaza's question about this kind of diverse experiences, histories, but they are not floating in the air, right? This school, high school, was a few kilometers away from the Indian school where American Indian students were tortured and physically, culturally, emotionally. And I mean, their hair was cut, their language was banned. And again, Aaron Burt-Bear was mentioning that when he was born, it was illegal for American Indian to speak their language. It was a banned language. We are not talking about like centuries ago. It's just like a few decades ago. So, Linda, how do you think about this one? Okay, we have this kind of multiple perspectives. The utopian vision is always something like positive. We get together, you know. How do we do it is our process. We work on this one. But in this context, what do you think about this? Like in the context of dystopia, we are, or the American Indians are living right now, and building a future, a utopia in that context.
Right. Well, it's all about negotiation, right? In real world context. And often the researchers, especially us, we didn't know, right? The exact, you know, all the minutia of the daily contingencies that the school is operating within, right? So they're poised best to answer those questions and negotiate, you know, and then families don't often know, right, exactly the same school conditions. So ultimately the context does have power as far as, you know, maybe the final say, but it's all about the negotiations that happen during sessions. You know, an idea would come from a community member, and then, well, is this feasible? And if so, then how could we implement this in the school? Right. But then also the school didn't know about various agencies that were serving the tribal community. So building, you know, the network of services often extends beyond the school site, right? Especially if you're dealing with a tribal community or a remote community with its own government and structures. So yeah, and it is a little bit, you know, indeterminate, right? It's a little bit scary. There's a lot of space and it could go in so many directions, but that's part of the letting go and part of the power sharing, and just letting, you know, trust in the places, you know, experts in their own rights is huge.
I think my idea is this. That's why maybe following up to earlier discussion about like what is our role as researchers. So I think what I see my role as we are bringing over here is this inclusive decision making, right? We cannot be over there all the time. The people we work with are not going to be over there, but the institutions are going to stay. As I said, this is the third principle in 3 years. So people are going to come and go. And there's this kind of common tendency to inform the people, which means cognition first, than the action later, or cognition and competence. We just try to, in US specifically, try to change the minds of the individuals, right? This is a very Protestant, very liberal idea. You see the individual as individual. In our work, we don't see that. We see this one almost like a system and individuals are together. So we wanted to create an organizational memory, an infrastructure, so that they are going to make decisions together, engage in this kind of problem solving together. As long as American Indian students are part of the decision making, as long as American Indian communities are part of the decision making, they can bring their perspective, they can represent themselves, their changing needs. So what we want to do actually almost like hack the system and implement that kind of software over there where they are going to make decisions, rather than hardware just pushing them some kind of ways of doing things as outsiders. And we can go back and just say, look, there are lots of stories. We can go back and just say, we did everything. This oppressive system pushed us back. We have those kind of horror stories, but then system is not changing. So it's just like a balance, right? How to fight, when to fight. And for us, the humble work is, if we just build this infrastructure over there for collective inclusive decision-making and build an organizational memory and infrastructure, we are trusting that communities are going to take over and make their decisions.
I have one question. I have really enjoyed reading about your work on Indigenous labs, and thought it's very inspiring, and this was a very inspiring talk as well. It's quite close in a way to something we've been doing with the Finnish kindergartens in our project on cultures of compassion, trying to create kind of these compassionate and caring kindergartens in a way. I think the kind of ultimate goal is the same, but I think the way you set it up is quite different. we worked in a very cultural diverse area as well as white researchers. And frankly, when we started our project, it was like the last project, so it's like maybe 5 years ago or more when we started it. We had very naive understanding of how to deal with cultural diversity in education. And throughout the project, I became like more interested, and we wrote about how about the utopian goal of eradicating racism there. But in our project, we found throughout the project, as a researcher, I became really interested in this discrimination of the Somalian-born children, because they seem to be kind of at the bottom of the ladder, in a sense that if there was racism against immigrants from immigrants, it was usually that the Somalis were like even discriminated by the other immigrants, and they are maybe like taking most distance to the mainstream culture. So we tried various means to kind of involve them in our change laboratory, trying to foster cultures for compassion, but it was really difficult. In a way, first of all, there was kind of maybe not so much trust to us like white researchers, but we found a person who was very a good collaborator, who was working there as a kind of a broker between the staff and those communities who had also Somali roots, and she was also an activist, and we actually hired her in the research group because I thought it's better to have work together. But still, we achieved quite limited success in trying to be of any help against this discrimination. Also encountering those kind of forms of oppression of the kind of the whole kindergarten system that Anna was talking about. But this is a very long introduction and context. But my question relates to this: if you kind of find individual people who are maybe from an oppressed groups, I have found that oftentimes they might not have a very strong opinion about the oppression. They might like adjust, maybe be afraid. They might have work like 3 jobs and be in a very like difficult situation. So if you ask them to invite them to criticize the system, they won't do it because that's very dangerous for them, and they might even not have considered. They might have even internalized the forms of oppression. Whereas this Nimko, with whom we worked, is a very special person because she was an activist. She was working in a rather working class job there, but she's also an author and very distinguished person in the Somali community. So like my question is, like, when we work with oppressed communities, of course we can question if I as a white person should even do that, or whether it would be like better for the Somali researchers to do that. But if we do that, I mean, do you see a difference between a person who is kind of engaged in activism or organized to do this kind of anti-oppression work, or just like regular people in a way who mind their own business and often in this kind of oppressed situation are struggling financially in multiple ways and might not have the energy to invest to try to do a systemic change? Do you get any kind of clue of what I'm trying to say here?
Yeah, diversity is the spice of life, and as they say, we had kind of examples of both. We had a ex service woman who was very outspoken, and she was a community member, and she was an activist. She was very, she had multiple children at the school and grandkids, and she was a powerhouse, and she really spoke on behalf of a lot of the community's voices and stories of trauma. We also had a parent that had a very difficult life. You talked about the suicide of one of his sons, that had happened, not too long ago, but his youngest son was the one that Dr. Ball mentioned about, he's, oh, school's okay for me. It's hard sometimes for my friends, but, they came to every meeting, both of them, to see that, synergy, that so much that the father had been through and even lost one of his sons. And then, but his current, student in the school had this really, positive outlook and bright future. And even though he got flack from his, fellow tribes, tribal members for maybe being the apple, right? He didn't really care. He brushed it off, and then his father was demonstrating, hey, I made all these mistakes. I was an alcoholic in the past. And everyone listened, and everyone heard, and everyone really felt for him. But he was definitely the type to not speak out. He didn't want to say anything bad. He always said, oh, the teachers here aren't racist and everything's fine, and my son's doing well. I don't want to rock the boat type of thing. And so everyone contributed in their own way. Right. And even just the presence, even folks that maybe showed up but didn't speak as much, right, but they were listening, and maybe they talking with their other neighbors and community members at home about the work. So I guess we can't control, right? We try to diversely represent as many people as possible, and then of course letting the community members identify other folks is something that's been key for us.
Thank you. That's very illuminating. I think we had a great discussion, and we can stop now. I just like to ask Linda and Aydin, especially Linda, you haven't been part of our discussions before. We have usually recorded these and shared with this closed group. Is this okay to share your presentation? So we might get some email discussion, and Aydin can maybe share.
It's okay with me, Linda.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you, everyone. It was a great meeting, and next time we have Zaza on the floor.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.